So summary. So for our summary, essentially I wrote down various bulletins of there was about 15 various different environmental justice claims that were happening in the area of Palestine and Palestinian territories. Not all of them had to do with colonialism. About like two, three of them were other communities, not communities, but companies taking advantage of the fact that there's an occupation happening in Palestine and exploiting the Palestinian land and people there. But I chose not to include those because we only have 5 to 7 minutes and there's so much things to talk about. So we're focusing on specifically the things that are connected with the settlement of Israel. Also, what I was gonna say earlier, because I forgot that quote, I think I was gonna say that literally during that period, the quote in which pushed a lot of Jewish people to move back to / move to at Palestine, move to Israel in Palestine, the Israel settlement in Palestine, was that it was a land without people for a people without land. The people without land was the Jewish people who were being prosecuted all over the world for 6,000 years and running, predominantly in Europe and in Russia. And what we're getting into is the very, even for that to be the inception, or if you want to look at it as one of the inceptions of this issue, stating a land without people already shows how, from the get-go, dehumanization has been a thing that Palestinians have had to deal with in a multitude. So other dehumanizing things that they've had to deal with when it comes to Palestinians is the fact that Palestine is a country located in the Middle East, and it has been home to, like I said earlier, various different ethnicities, various different religions, Muslims, Christians, Jewish people, literally since the onset of the Bible, as far as the onset of humanity, as far as we know. And then of course, religion eventually came a few thousand years after that. But like, that's why we said 6,000 years before, since the Jewish religion is the first religion of the Abrahamic religions that begin, the branches off of the Muslim religion and also, or the Islamic religion and also the Christian religion. Some important things to note about the specific environmental justice issues that were founded on the environmentaljusticeatlas.org was Israelis Navy's violent repression on Palestinian fisher people. So Palestinian fisher people are losing their livelihood due to continued Israeli attacks against them, including shooting, arresting, and chasing them, and limiting the area allowed for sailing and fishing, which even led in 2018 to deaths of fishermen. I also added this with another event, which was the decimation of Palestinians' fishing industries in Palestine. And I do want to clarify that decimation means 1 in 10. So that's a big number. That's 10% that we're talking of their fishing industry already being decimated. And Palestine's fishing industry and fisher people's livelihoods devastated by Israel's closure of Palestine's maritime waters for military purposes and to protect gas exploration, platforms, and pipelines. This is also why a lot of companies have been coming under fire. For example, there was a deal just struck for some companies to be able to come into occupied territory and drill for oil, which is very crazy, especially with what's happening right now. It's taking advantage of the natural resources that are there, which we'll get into in a second. Another incident that has been occurring is the beach erosion in Gaza in Palestine. Beach erosion in Gaza due to man-made structures is a major issue in the densely populated strip. Many of these structures are in Gaza itself and were installed between 1972 and 2010 with no prior study. And since we know that the Nakba officially happened in 1948, we see that like the continuation of this occupation and control of these lands, and then these man-made structures that are being built without the care and thought of the indigenous people there and the people it will affect, really begins to have an effect on the land. So Going forward, or going on, Israeli stone quarrying in the occupied Palestinian territory. Cemex, I might butcher this, but Haldberg cement and Israeli quarrying activities in the OPT violate rights and run counter to a United Nations resolution demanding that Israel cease exploitation, damage, depletion, and endangerment of Palestinian natural resources. Because if you don't know, Israel does control everything that comes into Palestine when it comes to aid, when it comes to water resources, which we'll also get into, and food and access to fertile lands. And then we have going forward Yada's. So this is a town-specific water pipelines that were cut by Israeli occupation forces. I might butcher this, but Mafasir Yada's water pipelines. And Palestine, Mafasir Yada villagers set up pipelines that would solve the water drought and cause problems, but the Israeli government destroyed the pipelines after 6 months. And then the Tovian landfill serves illegal Israeli settlements at the expense of Palestinian communities in the West Bank. The Tovlan landfill, which receives over 600,000 tons of solid waste from Israeli occupants in illegal settlements, contaminates air and poses health risks to Palestinian farming communities in the Jordan Valley. Uprooting and damaging olive trees in Palestine. Israeli settlers continue to burn olive trees on Palestinian lands, affecting Palestinian farmers' livelihoods and driving them out of their land. There is just a few more, and I know that we're getting to time, but like I said, this is such a big issue. So many things go into this, and I did feel like it was important to note how many various different things are going on when it comes to environmental issues, to stress my point that I'm going to get to in the end. So going forward, illegal landfill again, and this time it's between the lands of, I think it said Jayas and Azan, Palestine. All of this is taken directly from even the environmental justice atlas, so you can go directly on there, zoom into Palestine, and all the various different dots that you see are these exact things that are happening, so you could even follow along with me if you'd like. Then we have orchards affected by the annexation wall surrounding the West Bank, and these separation walls deny local populations means of livelihood and access to natural resources. We have Israeli factories relocate to the occupied West Bank to ensure more regulations, more lax regulations. So that means that, like, because the Palestine is not recognized as a full country by most Western worlds and the United Nations, there's not as much regulation, so then they get to do a lot more things and they don't have to think about the effects of what they're doing. And a part of that is essentially exposing them to unknown risks without consequences, the Palestinians and the Palestinian land. Going on, Israeli chemical plant closed down by court order in Israel due to toxic emissions has now moved across the Green Line and continues to operate, leading to serious health impacts. And then the last dot I have is greenwashing by the Jewish National Fund in Israel. The Jewish National Fund has been for years operating under the status of charity, while it enforces and conceals war crimes by planting exotic trees as a means to further dispose Palestinians from their land and traditions. And now that we've broken into that summary, I want to get into the lessons I've learned from doing this project. So again, sorry for this being so long, but the reason why I wanted to do this topic was because there's so much misinformation going around, and a lot of Americans, even though we have seen a plethora, we just saw 250,000, 250,000 people come out to Washington, D.C. in support of Palestine, and this is the most support that we have seen almost ever. I'm scared to say almost ever because it is very unfortunate, even those low numbers for a country of 330 million. But we are actively sending our money to support Israel. And the reason why we're doing that is under the guise of, oh well, Israel has to defend themselves because of the attacks that happened on October 7th. But I think the thing that I thought was interesting even in this research was how closely, and I've had these thoughts a lot, but even in the environmental effects, does that the occupied land of Israel and its effects on Palestine as a whole reflects the occupied land of the 13 colonies and its effects on the United States of America and the American continent as a whole, with the more power and strength that they raised. Even some of the first settlers here in the United States of America were escaping religious prosecution, and even though it was not on the extent that Jewish people were escaping religious prosecution, to use the excuse that you can come to a place that has inhabitants, even if you have connections to the place discontinued from centuries or descended from centuries, you have to have thought and nuance and how you're going to go about that in an ethical way. That's why the United Nations has been bearing down on Israel, especially more recently, because a retaliation of bombing entire regions, which you've already been terrorizing for so long, expelling people from their villages, from their homes, allowing people to buy this land that you don't even have the right to sell without speaking to these indigenous communities. But now to be consistently bombing them when over half the population is children that have nothing to do with the Hamas, which, if you don't know, the Hamas is the government that runs Palestine, which has actively been suppressing and oppressing the Palestinian citizens there, as well as I'm a little bit reluctant, a part of me is a little bit reluctant to say causing terror, just because there's racial implications with that, especially right now. And just like how we started off this video, we want to be very cautious of the anti-Semitic, Islam sentiment that can be kind of snuck into some of these conversations. But they have been causing violence, and there's a lot more information and a lot more twists and turns of both the IDF and the Hamas, but we have to recognize that both these governments are making actions on behalf of their people that is not ethical. And us as countries should not be supporting either of these governments. We should be supporting the people and getting them to a position where they don't have to keep on facing the brute end of a stick because of the actions of their government and because of the actions of working in tandem with colonization and racism. I think what was also really, really, really interesting is that the actions to occupy Palestine, it does not equivocate, and it does not, I don't think in any situation, make sense for what is and has been actually happening. I think at the end of the day, to now, which it's daunting to hear that we've now reached more deaths that have occurred since October 7th than occurred during the Nakba. That's scary. That's scary, especially because October 7th, it's only been going on 2 months now. And for that to reach such heights when the Nakba was a longer duration is very scary. It's very scary. So I was hoping that in learning more about these specific climate issues that are happening in Palestine, we could get more people that are advocates for climate justice, more people that are advocates for the earth and us treating the earth right, especially with the qualms and issues that have arisen from climate change, that them caring about the climate means that they also need to advocate for Palestine, because they are an oppressed group, and even though we need to be platforming them and we need to be looking at them for discussing what is happening to their communities and why it's happening that way, I also think that we need to be showing unwavering support, not just for the Palestinian people, for their cultures, for their traditions, but also for their land. Because what happens in Palestine and the things that we do to the lands in Palestine, bombing it, and all the other various things, all the other various effects that we listed down from these events of the occupation of Palestine, it will continue to have an effect on the entire globe. And us as global citizens, we have to take that into thought, care, and the nuance. So, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to be able to research more into environmental justice. It was a wondrous thing. I was educating myself a lot on the political and historical and economic kind of landscape of what's happening in Palestine, but I didn't know the specific environmental stresses. And it's really good to know that and to be able to communicate and share that. So thank you so much. I hope that you learned some things. I definitely am going to link the Environmental Justice Atlas down below if you want to check out the resources yourself. It is a .org, so like, girl, we're all good. I'm also going to link a really good Vox video, which explains very well what's happening in Palestine from the initial Nakba. And then I'm also going to just link down some more Palestinian activists, advocates that have been posting a lot more information and that can give a lot more information than I can. So hopefully it gives you a good start on where you're going. And other than that, I hope that you have, a part of me, if I'm being honest, was about to say happy reading, but it's obviously not really happy, the things that we're reading and taking in, but knowledgeable and readings that can hopefully give you ease in these troubling times, that you're not crazy and that what's happening is not okay. So thank you so much. It's Mix Hasbury again, and I am signing out.